on Motzei Shabbat or Shabbat, we start a new Masechet Shavuot. The Gemara is going to ask in a little bit, it's going to be the beginning of our sugya, why Shavuot exactly comes after Makot. Sanhedrin, as we recall, of course, talked about judgment and all the details of the punishment for different actions. Makot continued that, so it sort of made sense, and we discussed, though, in the beginning of Makot exactly why it was there. Shavuot, in some idea, would probably be talking about going to court and swearing and giving testimony and upholding all kinds of rules, which we're going to see throughout our Masechta about when people promise things to other people or commit things to other people. So there certainly is context there. However, in the Torah, Shavuot, and where our Masechta starts, it really refers to the basic idea of where a person brings a karban olav v'yared. Right, in the end of Parshas Vayikra, we have a whole discussion about if a person does a certain sin. We'll go through these sins. If they're rich, they bring an animal. If they're, middle class, we'll call it, they bring birds. If they're poor, they bring flour. That's a karban olev v'yared. It goes up and down based on the wealth and the financial capability of the person. The first case that the Torah talks about with that, which we're going to discuss, is a case of what's called tumat mikdosh ukdoshav. If you become tamei, or you bring tuma into the Beit HaMikdash or into the kachim, into karbanot, right? So let's start the Mishnah, and today's daf actually is just the Mishnah. The first Mishnah of Shavuot takes up the whole daf. Lengthy Mishnah. Of course, it will take some time in the Gemara to unpack the Mishnah, but we're going to do it as per the daf. What's on the page? So it says the Mishnah, Masechet Shavuot, daf bet, Shavuot. The concept of Shavuot that will lead to a karban. Well, actually, that's not really true. The concept of Shavuot, we'll see what that means, are shtayim. There are two Shavuot described in the Torah, shehin arba. But in fact, in essence, there really are four. And we'll see the simplest explanation of this shtayim is actions that you basically are saying in the future, right? What I'm going to do, I will or will not do something. And the four are things in the past. And again, this we'll all discuss in the Gemara. The next case, though, which is the one I just referenced, is Yidiot HaTuma, a person finding out that they have caused Tuma, right? Now, they could cause Tuma either by eating something Tameh, by being Tameh and going into the Beit HaMikdash, by being Tameh and eating something. So there are Shtayim. There are essentially two cases described in the Pasuk, right? And those two cases essentially, again, we'll see in the Gemara exactly how two become four. But basically, there are two cases, a person going into the Beit HaMikdash when they're tamei, or a person eating kachim when they're tamei. Shehin arba, they become four cases, and we'll see, how those become four cases in which you chayiv a karban, olev v'yared, or something else. We'll see in the Gemara. That is tuma. Yitziot Shabbat. Now we're on a list, and this list is very similar, though these things are not terribly connected. We'll see. Carrying on Shabbat. So carrying on Shabbat, we discussed this, of course, in the beginning of Masechet Shabbat. But carrying on Shabbat, generally you think of as carrying something from inside to outside, which, as we discussed in Shabbat, can either be by the balabait inside, giving it to someone outside, or someone outside, or putting it down outside, or the ani outside, picking something up inside and taking it out. But it can be arba, and arba would be the opposite, bringing it from outside to inside. Mar'ot nigaim, now getting to, again, totally separate, but we'll see the numbers. The Torah describes, I think we'll go through what this is, two different colors of nigaim, but really there's shtayim shein arba, really there's four different variations on those colors. And so these are all sets of things that are two that are four. Now we skip the first one, which is Shavuot, right, which is swearing to do something or not do something. And we start unpacking and describing the second one in our Mishnah. And of course, the Gemara will discuss, why exactly this happened the way it did. But the second case in our Mishnah was a case of tumat mikdosh ukdoshav. These are very important words. Tamei, tuma in the Beit HaMikdash or in kachim, right? And we think there's two that are four. So the simplest, and again, we'll discuss this all. Two could either be a person who's tamei walks into the Beit HaMikdash, or a person who's tamei eats kachim, right? Now it could be four because it could be other cases where either the kachim is tamei, or we'll see again the other discussions. But Says the Gemara, if you look through the Psukim in Vayikra, it's very clear there that it's talking about a case where a person, it says, V'hu yada ba'ashem, right? That he knew and became guilty. And we understand that means, continues the Gemara, the Mishnah, et sheyesh ba yedi'ah b'tchila yedi'ah basof. A person who knew that he was tamei, let's say, in the beginning, and he had awareness I'm tamei. I'm not supposed to go into Beit HaMikdash. He woke up Tuesday morning, forgot he was tamei. He woke up regular day, walked to the Beit HaMikdash, came back home and said, "Oh my gosh, I was tamei. I forgot." So he had a yediyah before. He knew he was tamei. He forgot Helem bentayim. He forgot in between. He walked into the Beit HaMikdash or ate kachim. He then remembered that he was tamei. That's the case for Harezeh Ba'olev Yored. When the Torah says, then you bring a karban to get a kapara, that is exactly that case. You have to have known that you were tamei and known it was inappropriate, forgot, and then known at the end. But what if you don't have all that knowledge? What about the next case? Says the Mishnah. What if yeshba yedi'ah, where am I? Sorry, it's hard to do this online. Yeshba, we are the fifth line, I guess. Yeshba yedi'ah b'tchila. Let's say you knew in the beginning, meaning you knew you were tamei, you knew you weren't supposed to go into Beit HaMikdash, you totally forgot. You forgot you were tamei, and you never remembered. You went into the Beit HaMikdash, you went back home, you went on to your life. Ein b'yedi'ah b'sof. So you did something wrong. You don't even know you did something wrong. Says the Mishnah, Sa'ir hanaseh b'fnim v'yom kippurim toleh. That the karban, the sa'ir hanaseh b'fnim, remember the many different sa'irim on Yom Kippur. You bring a sa'ir inside the Beit HaMikdash, meaning in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. You do a sa'ir b'chutz, which means in the Azara. You do a sa'ir la'azazel, which is not a karban, but it's thrown out all the way outside the Beit HaMikdash. So the sa'ir hanaseh b'fnim, the karban of the sa'ir, helps that person prevent the sin from counting against them. And the day of Yom Kippur, Yom Kippurim itself, are toleh. They hold that, meaning he doesn't get a kapara yet because it just prevents him from getting punished or having negative consequences from the sin that he did. Aji vadalo, until he remembers and says, "Oh my goodness, last Tuesday or whatever, I went into the Beit HaMikdash. I made a mistake." Once he remembers and has a consciousness that he did something wrong, he'll bring the karban olav yored and get a kapara. But in the interim, Yom Kippur is toleh. Yom Kippur and the Sa'ir are toleh. They don't get rid of it, according to our Mishnah, meaning if he remembers after Yom Kippur, he still has to bring the karban, but it holds him back from getting any consequences, let's say, during that time. How about Ein b'yedi'ah b'tchila al v'yesh b'yedi'ah b'sof? Let's say he never knew in the beginning, right? He had no awareness. And again, the Gemara will go through all these cases of what awareness means, but he didn't know that either he was tamei or he didn't know that you're not allowed to go into the Beit HaMikdash b'tumah. He didn't even know that rule. And he went in, and then yesh b'yedi'ah b'sof. Then someone educated him or told him, "Oh, by the way, yesterday you were somewhere and everyone there is tamei." And he found out that he had improperly gone into the Beit HaMikdash or eaten kachim b'tumah. So then, Sa'ir hanaseh b'chutz v'yom kippurim mechaper. Then he doesn't bring a karban olev yored because olev yored is only if you had a yediyah b'tchila, but he does get a kapara. And the kapara is from the Sa'ir hanaseh b'chutz, not the Sa'ir hanaseh b'fnim, which we said before is the inside one in the Beit HaMikdash, in the Kodesh, which is toleh. The Sa'ir hanaseh b'chutz, which is in the Azara, is mechaper with Yom Kippurim. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, Milvad Chatata Kippurim. The pasuk describes the karban of the Sa'ir on Yom Kippur. It says, besides this Chatata Kippurim. And what that tells you is that they're connected. Amash zem mechaper, zem mechaper. That the outside Sa'ir and the inside Sa'ir have similar functions. Meaning, Ma pnimi mechaper al davar sheyesh b'yedi'ah. Just like we said before, and again, the Gemara will tell you how we know this, but just like the Sa'ir Bifnim we said is Mechaper. Now remember, it's not truly Mechaper, it's only Toleh. But the Sa'ir Bifnim helps a person who had Yedi'ah. Remember, that's a person who had Yedi'ah B'tchiva that did not have Yedi'ah B'sof, so they don't know that they did something wrong. Then, but we said the Sa'ir Bifnim is Toleh for them. Av chitzon, so too the karban sa'ir that's done outside is ein mechaper. Its kapara is for someone who knew that they did something wrong. It can't be the same person. You don't need two karbanot for one person. It must be for someone who didn't know in the beginning but knew at the end. Ein mechaper al davar sheyesh b'yedi'ah. The person knew that it was wrong, but only after the fact. Now, what if they never know? Al she'ein b'yedi'ah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. Right? Let's say a person has no knowledge. They grew up, we'll see in the Gemara what exactly this means, but a person, doesn't have any knowledge that he didn't realize that you're not allowed to go into the Beit HaMikdash. He didn't realize that you're not allowed to, whatever, that he's tamei maybe, let's say. Again, we'll discuss this. So the question and he did a sin. He has no knowledge. Now, of course, if you don't really know, the question is why would it matter? You didn't do anything wrong willingly. And we'll see, but presumably there's still something wrong there, right? Or you should have known. You had an obligation to find out. So either way, so what happens in that case? If you don't have yediyah, not before you do it and not after you do it, but you've done a sin, right? So you grew up, you had no knowledge, but you did something wrong. So what happens then? Al she'ein ba yediyah lo b'tchila lo b'sof, 4 lines from the bottom. Then says the Mishnah, Si'irei harigalim u'si'irei rashi chadashim mechaprim. Then, remember, Sa'ir, in Yom Kippur, we have the Sa'ir B'fnim, the Sa'ir B'chutz. We're going to talk later about the Sa'ir Lazazel, and etc. But the Sirei Regalim, every regal, which had Pesach, right, we read Sa'ir Echad, right? You bring a Sa'ir. Those Sa'irim are Mechaper. And the Sa'irim of the Regalim, or the Sa'irim of Rosh Chodesh, which we had even more recently, are Mechaper for the person who has no knowledge. That's the function of those Sa'irim, that a person who does a sin, doesn't know they did the sin because they didn't know beforehand, they never had the education, they never found out about it, then God will not punish them for that because the karban is a kapara. And we'll discuss this all in the Gemara. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So all of this is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion of all these different categories. Says Rabbi Shimon Omer. Rabbi Shimon says, I disagree with one detail, what you said, Rabbi Yehuda. I agree that Sirei HaRegalim Mechaprim, that the sirim that you brought on Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and Shmini Atzeret would be mechaper for a person who did a sin but didn't know that it was a sin before or after. In this case, this Tumat Mikdash, specifically this sin. Aval lo sirei Rosh Chodeshim, but that is not the function of the Sa'ir that we bring on Rosh Chodesh. The Sa'ir that we bring on Rosh Chodesh has a different function. What is the function of the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh? Alma sirei Rosh Chodeshim mechaprim. So what is the function? What is the kapara that's achieved by the Sa'ir that's brought on Rosh Chodesh? Says Rabbi Shimon, right? Sorry, I turned the page on my daf. Yeah, Rabbi Shimon says the purpose of the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is al ha-tahar shachal tameh. It's referring to an Adam who's tahar, who eats kodesh that's tameh. Okay, now the Gemara, again, we'll go through how we know that that's prohibited, because previously we think tumat mikdash kedushav is where a person is tameh. How do we know if the food is tameh? So we will discuss all of this, just to be clear. But the Rabbi Shimon says that the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is there to be mechaper on a person who's tahar, who eats something tameh, which is inappropriate, hektish that's tameh, not food that's tameh, and that he gets a kapara, or she gets a kapara from the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh. Rabbi Meir's, the third opinion, says, I think that kol ha-si'irim, all the si'irim, right? And Rashi explains that this means every Sa'ir that's brought, whether it's done on Yom Kippur, whether it's done on Regalim, whether it's done on Rosh Chodesh, all these three categories. So the Sa'ir specifically of Yom Kippur, which is Sa'ir Nase B'chutz, meaning the regular Sa'ir on the regular Mizbeach, the Sa'ir of Regalim and Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh are all kaparotan shaveh. They're all equal. All these differentiations, this one is mechaper on this one's mechaper on that. I don't agree. I think they're all mechaper al tumat mikdosh ukdoshav. I think they're all mechaper on anyone who is involved in Tumah, in the Beit HaMikdash, or with Kadshim. It doesn't matter whether they knew in the beginning, they knew in the end. We'll see this, of course, more, but it doesn't matter to me. You can't separate and say Yom Kippur is for this one, Sukkot is for this one, Rosh Chodesh is for this one. They're all mechaper for those sins or omissions of Tumat Mikdosh Ukdoshav. So that is Rabbi Meir's opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, the third line on Daf Bet Amud Bet. So Rabbi Shimon says, I don't think it's so uniform. Si'irei Rashi Chodeshim mechaprim. I say, this is the same opinion Rabbi Shimon had 2 lines ago, right? We're re-quoting him, but you'll see why for the context. Rabbi Shimon says that Si'irei Rashi Chodeshim, as I just told you, the Sa'ir that you brought on Rosh Chodesh is mechaprim al tahar shachal tameh, right? That is the basic level. Every Rosh Chodesh you bring a Sa'ir, it's mechaper for a person who's ta'ar, who mistakenly eats food that's tameh. Not food, kadshim, that's tameh. And shal regalim, now the Sa'ir of Pesach or Shavuot or the holidays, that's mechaprin al she'em b'yediyah lo b'tchil lo b'sof. That's mechaper on the next level. Again, this is all sort of repetitious of what we said before from Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, that the Sa'ir of the regalim is mechaper on a person who is tameh, goes into Beit HaMikdash tameh, who is tamei and eats kachim, so he's not tahar shachal kodesh, he's a tamei shachal kodesh. In those cases, if it's aimed by yediyah, lo b'tchil v'lo b'sof. If he didn't know that what he was doing was wrong, he didn't know he was tamei, he didn't know you're not allowed to do it, he did it, the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh, the Sa'ir of Regalim is mechaper. And Shel Yom HaKippurim, the Sa'ir Nase B'chutz on Yom Kippur is mechaper for a unique case, al she'em ba yediyah b'tchila, time where a person didn't know before they did the act that it was inappropriate, either because they didn't know or because they didn't know they were tamei, let's say. Aval yesh ba yediyah b'sof, but then they find out afterwards. So they know at the time of Yom Kippur, they can't bring a karban olev yored, because we said earlier a karban olev yored is only if you knew before the act and you knew after the act. So then Yom Kippur is, again, we keep saying mechaper. Earlier we said tolah, but Yom Kippur takes care. I'm sorry, no, we didn't say tolah. This Yom Kippur is mechaper for that act of tumat mikdash ukdoshav. So that was what Rabbi Shimon said. So Rabbi Meir said, no, everything covers everything. All three Sa'irim cover all these sins, these acts. And Rabbi Shimon said each one is specific. So Amarlos, Rabbi Meir said, or they said to Rabbi Shimon, well, let me ask you a question. Are they interchangeable? Meaning, let's say you showed up to the Beit HaMikdash and you're dedicating a Sa'ir and said, I want this Sa'ir to be for Yom Kippur, right? And the Gizbar comes in, he says, well, guess what? Someone else sent a Seir for Yom Kippur. What can we use yours for Sukkot, right? Which comes right after Yom Kippur. So generally, if you dedicate something for a specific sin, you can't just apply it to a different sin. So they said to him, can you, if the Seir Yom Kippur or Seir Rosh Chodesh, let's say, is not needed, can you bring it for a different Seir? And Rabbi Shimon said, he said, sure. They're all the Seirim overlap. They all are mechaper on similar actions. It's okay to bring one for the other, to reassign it. So Amrullah, but they said back to him, we got you, Rabbi Shimon. You just said that each one has its own kapara. Each one has its own Yom Kippur, Chagim, Rosh Chodesh. Each are mechaper for a different act. So how can you bring one in place of another? They're not the exact same thing. Amar lem, so Rabbi Shimon said to them, stop being so exact. Kulan ba'in l'chaber al tumat mikdash ukdoshav. They all come for a similar theme. It's true, there's different details, but all three Seirim come as a kapara for tumat mikdash ukdoshav, for actions that have to do with tumah in the Beit HaMikdash or with kachim. And therefore, although they do differentiate between whether the person's tameh or the food is tameh, whether you forgot or you didn't forget, they still overlap. There's enough commonality that you can bring one for the other. So that's Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Meir, who says, of course, you don't have to worry at all. You bring them all for, they all cover the same actions. The next opinion, this is really the fourth opinion, we have Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir, not Rabbi Shimon, comes along Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, it's different than Rabbi Shimon Stam, who's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but says Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Omer Mishmo, he said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, that Tzirei Rashi Chadashim, in fact, are mechaprim al tahar shachat tamei, which we said that before, right? The Rabbi Shimon holds that the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for a person who's tahar, who eats kadshim, that's tamei. But mosif aleim shel regalim. It's not that the regalim are for something else; they're in addition. Meaning they are mechaper, says the Mishnah, al tahar shachat tamei, just like Rosh Chodesh. And more things. Al she'ein ba yediyah lo b'tchilav lo b'sof. And for a person who walks into the Beit HaMikdash tamei, let's say, who didn't know before they did it or after they did it that this was inappropriate, or they didn't know they were tamei, right? So they didn't know that it was wrong. So Chagim or Moadim, someone uses regalim, sorry, are mosif on Rosh Chodesh. They're not instead of Rosh Chodesh, not different. They're added to Rosh Chodesh. And then Yom Kippur, mosif aleim shel Yom Kippurim. Then Yom Kippur is even more than that. So Yom Kippur does what Rosh Chodesh does. It does what the regalim do, and it's also Shehu is how the Bach changes it. Mechaper, because it's only one holiday, right? One karban. It is mechaper also on, first of all, tahar shachal tamei, like Rosh Chodesh. V'al she'ema yediyah lo b'tchil lo b'sof, a person who did trumat mikdash kedusha but didn't know that he wasn't able to do that before or after, like regalim. And the third thing is al she'ema yediyah b'tchila v'yesh yediyah b'sof, a person who didn't know that was wrong, but they did know after the fact. So that's the third case. Remember, the fourth case, where you knew before, you forgot, and you knew after, none of these are mechaper, because there you have to bring a karban olev yored, right? That's what the Torah says. You have to bring a karban to be mechaper. But the communal karbanot are mechaper for all the other levels below that, okay? So that is the Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda's interpretation of Mishmo in the name of Rabbi Shimon. Again, the Mishnah continues with the same question that they asked in Rabbi Shimon before. Amrulo, so they said to Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, so are these karbanot interchangeable? And Amar lehem, hey, he said, yeah. If you separate a karban and asham for Rosh Chodesh, you can reassign it for Yom Kippur. And Amrulo, so they said to him, Cain, if you're right, I don't understand how they're interchangeable. I understand that you shall Yom Kippurim kravim b'rosh chadashim. I understand you can go down in value, meaning Yom Kippur is mechaper for tar shachat tamei, ve'en b'yediyah b'tchila ve'lo b'sof, for yesh b'yediyah, ein b'yediyah b'tchila ve'yesh b'yediyah b'sof. right? Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for one of those three things. So I understand that a korban for Yom Kippur can be reassigned for Rosh Chodesh, but how can you go the opposite way? How can you reassign a korban of Rosh Chodesh, which is only mechaper on one thing, and say bring in a Yom Kippur, which is mechaper, l'chaper, kapara, she'ena shalah, right? So that was a question they asked Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, Rabbi Yehuda. Amar lahem, Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda said to them, well, again, like we said earlier, kulam ba'in l'chaper tumat mikdash u'kedoshav. They are all being mechaper for tumat mikdash u'kedoshav, and even though there may be differences, right, in Yom Kippur and Regalim and Rosh Chodesh, the set is the same set, and therefore they're interchangeable. Okay, so that is that. Again, this is all a Mishnah. Don't get nervous. The Gemara is going to go through and understand, some of the background and the psukim and the drushes of how we know all of this. But the final thing not the final thing, the next thing our Mishnah talks about near the Aleph of the in Mishpat, if you have that in your Gemara, it's around 15 lines from the bottom. Al Zadon. Let's say you do something on purpose. Now, again, we'll discuss in the Gemara, exactly what did you then did tshuva, right? You came back from it, but you did it on purpose. And you did tumat mikdash ukedoshav. So you on purpose went to Beit HaMikdash tamei, or you ate kachim when it was tamei, right? So you did it on purpose. Then, assuming again, we'll talk about the tshuva. Then sa'ir hanaseh bifnim v'yom kippur mechaprim. Then the kapara you get is from the sa'ir, not the sa'ir we've been talking about so far. We've been talking a lot about the sa'ir hanaseh b'chutz, the one that was done in the Azara. But this is from the special Sa'ir HaNaseh Bifnim that was done in Yom Kippur. That is Mechaper, and Yom Kippur itself, is Mechaper for people who do sins on purpose. Again, we'll talk about them doing tshuva, right? But the ones who do sins on purpose. So that's the Sa'ir HaNaseh Bifnim, the fourth Sa'ir, basically. So that is... all these halachot have to do with Tumat Mikdash Ukdosha. Now says the Mishnah, what about every other sin in the book, right? Al Shar Averot Torah, someone who commits any other Avera in the Torah, and we're going to give a list of them. Kalot, those that are light, Chamorot, those that are heavy, Zdonot, that which you do on purpose, Shkagot, that's what you do by mistake, Hoda, that which you know about that you did wrong, Lo Hoda, that which you don't know, or Hoda, again, we'll discuss this all. It's obviously very vague. Hoda usually means you became, you knew about it, you didn't know about it. If it's aseh, if you did it with an action, or a lot aseh, right? You did aseh, I guess, is you failed to do an action. A lot aseh, you did a lot aseh, you did something inappropriate. If it's a case of kritot, where you punishment is karet, or mitot beidin, all of these sins, then we have a fifth sayir. So not the sayir naseh bifnim, just sayir lashem. Not the sayir of Yom Kippur that goes outside, not sayir of Rosh Chodesh or Regalim, but the Sa'ir HaMishtalech, right? The Sa'ir HaMishtalech, which is not a korban per se, right? It's designated, it's split up, they take it out and throw it off the cliff. That, the Sa'ir HaMishtalech, is Mechaper. So the Sa'ir HaMishtalech is a very big, broad one. And again, we will discuss this all in the Gemara, who it's Mechaper for, exactly how much tshuva and things you have to do. Finally, says our Mishnah, this also applies to everybody. Right, the pasuk talks, of course, about bringing a special korban if a kohen does something, and remember that the vidoy that if everyone remembers from Yom Kippur service, right, the vidoy that the kohen gadol says, he says one for his family, right, one for the kohanim, one for himself, sorry, one for kohen gadol, one for the kohanim, and one for everyone. But says the Mishnah, echad Yisraelim, ve'echad kohanim, ve'echad kohen mashuach. These are kapara, the Kar Mishtalech is mechaper for everyone, for Yisraelim, for Kohanim, for Kohen Mashiach. So then ma bein Yisraelim, the Kohanim, the Kohen Mashiach. So why is there, unique vidoy and unique kaparot that the pasuk talks about for these different classifications or categories of people? Ela shapar mechaper al Kohanim. It's the par, right? No, we haven't talked about par yet, just to be clear, right? We're talking about the Seirim the whole time. But the par is mechaper on the Kohanim. Al tumat mikdash ukdosha, for any kind of tumat that they did in the Beit HaMikdash. And again, we'll discuss it, but if you recall, that's a separate, right? You brought parim on Yom Kippur, different than the Sirim, and that is mechaper for the Kohanim. Rabbi Shimon says that I disagree with that. I think Kashem Shadam Sa'ir Hanaseh Bifnim Mechaper al Yisrael. I think that just like the Sa'ir Hanaseh Bifnim, remember on Yom Kippur, is mechaper on Yisrael for Tumat Mikdosh Kedoshav. Remember, it's the Sa'ir Hazazel that's mechaper for everything else. But just like the Sa'ir Hanaseh Bifnim is mechaper on Yisrael, Tach Dam Hapar so too the blood of the par, which is a different animal, but remember the par was brought inside and they sprinkled it on the mizbeach and on the parochet. So that is mechaper al kohanim. So that I say is mechaper al kohanim. And kashem sheviduyo shel seir mishlech mechaper al Yisrael, just like the vidui of the seir mishlech is for all the sins of Yisrael. Kach viduyo shel par mechaper al kohanim. So too the vidui of the par is mechaper on the kohanim, and so he's disagreeing with the earlier opinion that the seir mishlech goes for everybody, and he's saying that the par anas b'fnim actually is what is mechaper for kohanim, not the seir mishlech. And of course, the Gemara will discuss in which cases they disagree. So that concludes the Mishnah. Obviously, very long, a lot to discuss, and the Gemara will go through this piece by piece. But I'm going to stop here, and I hope everyone can enjoy this recording, and then we'll pick it up on Sunday on Yom Rishon, hopefully from Daf Gimel, starting at the Gemara at the bottom of Daf Bet Amud Bet. Thank you very much for joining. Hope we get to learn together in this exciting Masechet, and have a Shabbat Shalom.